Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This week I decided to do a new type of video where I'm making my own chaotic recode tier list. And I've taken all the decks that are S tier and A tier on the chaotic Discord's tier list. And I'm going to organize them myself into my own tier list, and then within the S tier, A tier, B tier, I'm going to organize those decks into what I think are the strongest to weakest based on my experience just playing in tournaments and playing on that chaotic recode ladder. Now, even though I've been playing for over a year, a lot of these decks I haven't played myself, so a lot of these opinions might have not enough experience backed up behind it, because a lot of it is based off my experience and based off the decks that I play, where I play a lot of Mepenian decks like Strike, Rahr, and I do like some mixed decks as well, the Quad decks too. But other than that, I don't really play that much tier list decks. I'll play just, as you know, meme decks for fun if I'm not playing Mepedians or like Swimming Team, Master of the Sails. I do play Underworld Burn as well. Yeah, I do. I play Strike and Burn. But yeah, this basically, I'm just saying this is from my experience. This is my opinions. Feel free to put your own opinions in the comments. Let me know what you agreed with or disagreed with, etc. And yeah, I'm going to start with what I think are the strongest decks. So I'm going to start with S tier, and then I'm going to move down from there. The S tier decks on the Chaotic Discord are Strike, Rahr, Burn, Swimming Team, and Hiyadrum. Now, Swimming Team and Hiyadrum are new additions to S tier, so I'm going to save them for last. We're going to start with the two most popular decks that you see chaotic players play, and those are Strike and Burn. Now, Strike, I'd say that's the most popular deck, and that's because of how easy it is to pick up. It doesn't take a lot of thinking to play the deck. There are some nuances, but realistically, it's not that hard to figure out. It's just for your first attack does a bunch of damage, and then you want to get Before the Storm, and that does a bunch of damage. And use something if they have Zerium, like use your music to get rid of Zerium or flip it down, etc. Like, it's not a hard deck to pilot, I'm going to say. And Strike has a lot of good matchups. Strike's weakness is actually Overworld, and there are only two Overworld decks that are on the tier S or tier A on the tier list from the Discord, and those are Wise Guys and POP. Now, POP is not a popular deck at all. I don't see it very much. Wise Guys is a bit more popular, and that is your biggest counter. But POP is also a deck that completely shuts you down. POP has R-Bead, which can reduce an attack to 5 damage, and they run Interlude of Interruption and other negates. Wise Guys the exact same thing, and then also Wise Guys and POP run Rhyme of the Reckless, which is another music that is very good against Strike. And that's one of the reasons they both counter you. Also, Wise Guys has Zerium on Avena, and Zerium's a big counter to Strike. Plus, they have Garv to flip up the gear if you flip it down with Apron. So that's why both those decks hard counter you. But Strike is also a deck that can beat any other deck on this list. Some decks it has a good matchup against, like it's great against Compost, it's great against Sysops. It's pretty good against Danian Burn, stuff like that. But the strong point of Strike is it can win any matchup other than those two. It has some tougher matchups, like I'd say Swimming Team, pretty hard matchups, like I'd say pretty even. Rahr, Sails, Burn's pretty difficult to do, but it's not like Strike is unfavored in any of those. I'd say it's only unfavored in those two matchups. And I'm going to keep Strike at the top of S tier right now. We're going to put it ahead of Burn. Now, Burn is slightly weaker, I'd say, than it used to be. There's been a couple location bans. I'm not recently, but the past like 8 months that have slowly nerfed Burn a little bit. And Burn is still S tier for sure. It's just a little weaker. Burn losing to Strike or having a not, I'd say, unfavorable matchup against Strike kind of hurts it a little bit. The Burn Rahr matchup's pretty even. Same with Burn Swimming Team. But Wise Guys again and POP are both decks that counter Burn well. But on top of that, Swimming Team, as I said, is pretty good against Burn. Sails is good against Burn, better than Swimming Team is. Tree Frogs is pretty decent against Burn. And then you have Danian Burn, which is rising in popularity and is actually a very strong deck, also beats Burn. So I think the rise of Danian Burn has kind of knocked Underworld Burn down a little bit in the S tier ladder. And so I'm actually going to put Rahr. Actually, we're going to keep these off for now because they're next. But these are the two new S tier decks. But I'm actually going to put Rahr ahead of Underworld Burn. Now the reason why Rahr is so strong is because it has a chance to win every single matchup. And that's because of Zelf and Puriel Forest or Mepeta Mirage. So if you're running Puriel Forest and Mepeta Mirage, if you get to go first, there's 50% chance of that happening, right? If you get to go first and you get one of those locations and you jump into the back line, either they don't have a defender, so you take out one of the support creatures, or if you jump the creature at the end and you have Mepeta Mirage, if you beat that defender, and usually the defender is not their main fighter, so it's a little easier to beat it, and you put Mepeta Mirage on Ixek, now one of their supports in their middle row is going to have to fight you. So that's why Rahr is always a strong pick, because I'd say 20% of the time you're going to end up going first, and you're going to get one of those locations, and then it's just really easy from there. Also, Rahr is just a solid deck in general because your supports can die and Ixik can still survive. It's not like other War Beast decks where you need your Conjurers to stay alive, and if you lose them, your War Beasts are going to start taking crazy recklessness damage and you've lost the game. It's not like that. That's why Ixik or Rahr can survive in situations where other decks that lose their supports would just lose. Now, it's not like it doesn't hurt you losing your supports, but Ixik is still a strong creature on its own. And Rahr is a deck that can take on Strike and Burn. It's got pretty even matchups both ways, and then it does pretty good against some of these A-tier decks. The only thing I am going to say is Rahr doesn't have a bunch of burst damage like Strike does or Burn does. It's more consistent damage and then giving your opponent recklessness so they hurt themselves. And so there's some more greedy decks that are rising, like Hiyadrum, Swimming Team, Sails. They all like lots of time these two build up counters. And then Hiyadrum's pretty greedy. Just after a couple attacks are thrown, you start gaining more and more energy. You have Stealth 4-2's pretty greedy. Sysops likes to build counters. So Rahr is a little weak in some of those matchups. The good thing against Alm Quad matchups is if you're trying to kill Ixik and you have Alav makes it so Ixik only takes 5 damage from the Alm Quad counters because everything's reduced by 5. So that's kind of nice. But Rahr, I'd say it's stronger than Burn because it's good against these other two S tier decks, and it's always got a strong chance. And Rahr is actually a good pick into these overworld decks as well. Now I'm going to move on to these new S tier decks. Now Swimming Team is newly S tier. It's I think it's been S tier caliber for a while, but it's only been recently moved to S tier on the Discord. And it's rising in popularity. The whole idea is you're playing water attacks to build counters on your Fluid Morpher, and then you have 2 Na'inos on your team. So every turn you can take 2 counters off your Nunkwern, and you're putting them on your Alm Quads, and you can just stack crazy amounts of counters on your Alm Quad and destroy your opponent that way. Swimming Team is a deck that does not have very many tough matchups. The nice thing is you can also run Unheard Melody. So decks like Hiyadrum, which rely on one fighter, your Loma is not the best fighter, you can take it out. Even if they try and put counters on Naina, on Hiyadrum, you can move it off with your Naina. With their negates, you can move the counters off their Loma so they don't have refrain, and you can easily play around Interlude. Plus, you have all your counters. You can just stack counters and try and burn their supports as well. It's another option. And then Swimming Team, I'd say these are all tough matchups actually for Swimming Team, but none of them are like, oh, you're going to lose. You can beat Strike for sure. It's a little hard because Strike is, if they're playing the Ifjan setup, they have Ifjan. They're going to have a Song of Shelter. They might have 1 or 2 Carnivore's Keenings. And then Rahr, their Ixik takes reduced damage from the Umpquad counters. And Burn can burn you. You're going to have to try and survive their burn. But Burn's actually probably decent against Swimming Team because they can try and kill you before you build counters. But you do start with 2 counters on each Umpquad. And it really depends what your music lineup is. Because Swimming Team has a couple options for overworld music. If you play more Rhyme the Recklessness, like if you run, let's say, 1 or 2 of those, you're probably slightly better against Strike. If you're running Interludes, you're going to be better against Burn. So it's kind of a pick and choose which deck you want to be weaker against. But then Swimming Team, Master Sails is another Umpquad deck, but Swimming Team just completely outpaces Master of the Sails. It's great against Compost, it's good against Tree Frogs, it's good against Wise Guys. Again, this is another Fluid Morph deck, Sysops, it's great against that. Fleeander has to play very safe because if Fleeander gets too low before they try and heal up, you can just keep stacking Umpquad counters on the burst and kill them. Hermatred, they get a lot of energy, but you have a lot of counters, and you have Dead Water, which can remove all their counters off of their Alexia, and then they're out of music. The Danian Burn matchup, it might be interesting because they can burn fairly quickly, but again, you can definitely win that matchup. You can definitely win this. You shut down Stelfor. Like, Swimming Team is a deck with I would say 0 hard counters and only a couple unfavorable matchups that you can always win. And that's why I'm putting Swimming Team as the top deck right now. I haven't been playing it that much, but based on what I've seen and when I have been playing it, I do think it's the best deck to play Chaotic with right now. Now for the final S tier deck on the Chaotic Discord, Hiyadrum. When Hiyadrum works, it works so well. It is so oppressive. After every attack, you're gaining 20 energy because Hiyadrum Rock Ripper, he expends Earth to gain 20 energy. The whole idea is you're constantly flipping a Destructizuka that is attached to Hiyadrum as their battle gear. And as that keeps getting flipped up, after every attack you flip it down, flip it back up, you're gaining 20 energy. It is very hard to shut down. They have a Tune of Zerium to bring their Destructizuka back. They've got 2 negates with Refrain of Denial and Interruption. It's got some protection against burn with Carnivore's Keening, Opus Opposed, and it has an Aegis to try and stop Ice Discs. So it covers its weaknesses very well, and against a lot of decks, it's just so oppressive. Just like Strike and Burn are oppressive, it's the same thing. It's so oppressive. But some of its weaknesses can be exposed. Just like when I talked about how Swimming Team beats Hiyadrum, Unheard Melody on the Hiyadrum, Sysops have a chance to do that. They only have 1 Naina instead of 2. But Sysops, if you're running Unheard Melody, can definitely do it. Where is it? Right there. Masters of the Sails, they have Unheard Melody. They don't have Naina. But they do have double Interlude. They might have a chance to beat Hiyadrum that way. Then there's the problem of Ice Discs. Compost and Fleeander, it depends what they're running. If they're running Dead Water versus Ice Discs. But if they're running 2 Ice Discs, you only have 1 Aegis. So once they play a second Ice Disc against combat with Hiyadrum, you can no longer use your abilities, which means you can no longer continue flipping up Bazooka. And if they use it at the beginning of combat, you're kind of screwed. So Hiyadrum, when it's working well, it's insane. It stomps on decks. But it has one too many weaknesses, which is why for my tier list, I'm actually going to drop it to A tier. Ferric, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I do think Hiyadrum is very, very high A tier and not S tier. In case anybody's wondering, Ferric's the guy who made the deck. Alright, let's move on to the A tier decks on the Chaotic Discord. So Danian Burn is a deck that's been rising in popularity. Elemental Elegy is a music that was unbanned, I'd say maybe 2 months ago, month and a half ago. And that music removes elements from a creature. And there have been some Danian Burn lists that have been running 1 or even 2 Elemental Elegies, along with everything else Danian Burn can run that targets creatures. Just like their Onquad counters, it runs, you could run Caster's Warsong if you're running Greep version. Otherwise, I forget the name of the music, but you can heal your creature and burn the enemy's creature at the same time, and you can, usually that's going to deal 25 or 20 damage. It's based on how many creatures with water you have. Anyways, Danian Burn has been very good climbing the ladder. It's actually a decent matchup against Underworld Burn. It can beat Rahr. It can be Strike, but I say Strike is favored. And also has difficult time against Swimming Team. Actually, that is a guess. I haven't really played that matchup. But I actually don't know about this matchup. It might be a little even. It does, I think, lose to Hiyadrum. But it's pretty decent against, or it's good against Burn. And it's also very good against a lot of these other decks. It's good against Wise Guys, good against Tree Frogs. Even the Elemental Elegy, actually it's not as good against Tree Frogs, but it's good against Wise Guys because you can stop a Venom from moving with Elegy. Because it also doubles down as if the creature doesn't have elements, you can stop it from moving. So you can say the same thing about POP. It can shut down Stelfor because you can burn the Stelguard before it increases its energy. I'm not sure about Fleeander, but if their Fleeander gets too low, you can stack Burn on the burst to kill their Fleeander. And anyways, just the rise of Elegy has made it a very strong deck and another menace on the ladder. And because of that, it does have some bad matchups, but I actually think it has less weaknesses or less bad matchups than Hiyadrum. So I'm actually putting it over Hiyadrum in A tier. So these two are the top decks, I think, in A tier. Next, I'm going to put Master of the Sails right after those two. It is very similar to Swimming Team, but it doesn't stack counters as fast as Swimming Team. But its upside is you can run Realm Water Master, and that gives all your creatures extra 10 energy, which I think makes the deck good against Strike in some places, because you can survive that initial burst of damage a little bit easier with the extra 10 energy and start building counters that way. And it's also slightly better against Burn because of that extra 10 energy. But I think in all other cases, it's just the worst Swimming Team. You build counters less quickly, and if you ever play Swimming Team versus Sails, you will see why Swimming Team just destroys Sails in that matchup. But being a worse version of the top deck on the ladder right now is not a bad place to be, and that's why I'm putting Sails number 3 in A tier. Next, I'm actually going to put Fleeander, which some of you may be surprised with because I rarely see Fleeander on the ladder. But I really think it is an underrated deck. The amount of healing you get with Fleeander, sometimes it rivals Hiyadrum, although Hiyadrum is the better deck. But Fleeander, your infections, you can infect up to 10 on the first turn if you're running double O'Day in a mixed Fleeander deck. And that's 3 full healings from Fleeander from whatever energy it's at all the way to full. It is a little weak against Strike because Strike can make it so it's hard to make it a one-shot, but if Fleeander doesn't have music, you can maybe one-shot the Fleeander. But other than that, it's just a lot of damage quickly to make Fleeander use their heals very quickly. And against Underworld Burn, you can win that matchup, but it's very, very tough because you have to know exactly what Underworld Burn has left, so you know at what amount of energy you have to heal at. Because if you wait too long before you heal, like Fleeander's at 10, Underworld Burn will completely punish you for that by stacking every single type of burn they have. Just they'll burn you when you're at 10 of energy, you'll heal. They burn on top of that on the burst, so you'll die before your heal goes through. You heal again, you play music, they'll just keep layering on the burst just like that and punish you. So that matchup's hard, but you can win it. Same thing with the Quad matchups, and Quad's very popular right now. Quad's in swimming team, Danian Burn, he's in sales. So that's why Fleeander is a little weak, but I do think it's underrated because it's very good against a lot of these other decks, especially slow decks like Wise Guys is a bit slow, so Flame's good against that. I do think Fleeander is pretty good against Sysops. I think it would be pretty strong against Tree Frogs, Compost. It completely shuts down Hermatrid's attack because Hermatrid's all about infecting and Fleeander uninfects stuff. So you completely shut that down. Against POP, they actually build, or their Maxer POP will build stacks against you, so that's kind of a tough matchup. And then Hiyadrum, I think just you can't kill their Hiyadrum because they keep getting more and more energy and they just outpace you. As Stealth 4, they probably get your supports out into the open and just stall you, so I think you lose that too. But it's underrated against... Actually, it does have a lot of bad matchups. Or tough matchups, I'd say. So I'm thinking about Fleeander played at the highest level, or at like played perfectly, can beat Burn, it can beat Swimming Team, Danian Burn, Sails, Strike. This is what I've been told. I can't actually play Fleeander like that. I haven't played. I'm actually going to bump it down. I'm just going to make it off my experience. And I was planning to put, I think, Wise Guys and Tree Frogs right after it, but I'm actually going to put Fleeander behind that. I actually changed my mind. Fleeander, I think it's very hard to beat Quad decks and Burn decks. I do think some people are optimistic by saying Fleeander can beat those decks. I'm going to put it down a little bit. I think that's very hard to do, and you have to get a little lucky. But Fleeander is still very strong and still underrated, especially against slow decks like Tree Frogs and Wise Guys. But Tree Frogs and Wise Guys are both decks that are good at shutting down fast decks. Wise Guys is the ultimate counter to the two most popular decks, Strike and Burn. If you were ever having trouble against this deck, or both, play Wise Guys. Wise Guys has a main fighter, Avena, with Zerium, and you have Garv. So if you're playing in Strike, Zerium completely counters it. If it gets flipped down, Garv flips it back up. You also have double Rhyme of the Reckless, and you have Negates. And Rhyme, it hurts Strike a lot. So does Zerium. That is a matchup you should never lose against Strike. Maybe 1% of the time you lose that if Strike gets mega lucky. I don't even know how. And against Burn, the same thing. You should be playing the Porthin version of Wise Guys. I do think that is the best deck list. If you're not running Porthin, if you're running Loma, a defender, you might lose against Burn. I think it's so favored, but it's a little harder. But with Porthin, you should completely shut down Burn as well. You should win that. You have a lot of energy. You have Drape to give energy to other creatures. You could even be running the double Drape version. And then Porthin, you can protect your creatures from Burn. But Wise Guys is weak against greedy decks, because Wise Guys is a very slow, control-y type deck. But then you get completely countered by decks like Swimming Team, or Sails, or Hiyadrum, decks that are greedy and they want to wait. Like Sails and Swimming Team, they'll just build up counters. Same with Sysops on their Fluid Morphers. Same with Stealth 4. They're just going to keep building counters. They'll keep stacking and then take you out and punish you for playing control-y and slow. That's why Wise Guys, that's his middle of the pack of A tier. Because otherwise you'd be like, whoa, a deck that destroys two of the best decks in the game, why isn't it higher up? And that's why, because it's very greedy, the meta right now, and Wise Guys doesn't punish that. Tree Frogs is very similar to Wise Guys, except it's not as punishing to Burn and Strike, but it's better generically overall. You have two Anarchiars, where Wise Guys has like Avena as your main fighter, and then you might have a Tartarak, but he's weaker. Tree Frogs has two of your main fighters, and you do more damage. Usually, you're not playing as slow because you have... Actually, I don't know if that's true. You might have the same amount of damage output, but you do have an Elemental Denial, and you're good at stopping other Discipline decks because you have a Lanker with Husk. So if you're against Wise Guys, you can... I think you win that because you can just keep giving your Anarchiars increased wisdom. So Wise Guys doesn't have enough wisdom to make a lot of its challenges. And Tree Frogs is just solid with double Carnivores Keening and not taking the recklessness from that. So that makes it pretty good against burn because you get that extra carnivores. It's decent against strike. You have elemental denial. But again, it's not that good at punishing the greedy decks like Swimming Team, Sysops, like Fluid Morph decks, Sails, Hiyadrum, Stealthware, etc. The same decks as I said for Wise Guys. But I am going to put it just below Wise Guys because I think Wise Guys is better at shutting down these two decks. Now, I do have to play these two decks more. I haven't played them that much, but that's where I'd put them. And I did explain Fleeander, but I do think it has too many matchups to be put, or too many bad matchups to be put above Wise Guys and Tree Frog. So I think I'm going to keep it again still in the middle of A tier, but below these two decks. Oh, I have two Hiyadrums back, so I'm just going to keep that at the end. We don't need that. Anyways, let's see. So left, we've got Sysops, Compost, Hermatrid's Attack, POP, and Stealthware. This is a new A-tier deck made by Zygrus. It's pretty strong. I do think that the next strongest deck is going to be Hermatrid's Attack. Now, this is also a not very popular deck, but I do think it's, again, good against these two decks, Underworld Burn Strike, and I have seen Hermatrid's Attack run with Chowler on Hermatrid, and if you're running that version, it's a great counter for Omquad decks, which are pretty popular right now. There's 3 of them right here that are top of the meta, Sails, Burn, and Swimming Team. Very good counter against that. It's also decent against Burn because they can't Omar PR you. And Hermatrid's Attack, basically the idea, you're just giving your Hermatrid a ton of energy, like up to 100 something usually, by infecting other creatures and then activating Hive. It's actually pretty good against Strike. Strike can beat it too, but if you're running the version with Zerium and Stingblade Prototype, you have a good chance of beating Strike in that matchup. And you have enough energy that you might be able to beat decks like Danian Burn, and you do run double Deadwater with Hermatrid's Attack, but you also have a lot of Courage attacks because you got Outperform Courage 10. So even if you lose your water element, you can still win combats because a lot of your damage comes from that Outperform. You do lose to Hiyadrum because you don't really have a way to outpace Hiyadrum. I'm pretty sure you lose that matchup anyways. But then again, if you're looking for a way to stop the Unquad meta right now, you could run Hermatrid's Attack with Chowler on Hermatrid. Next, I'm going to put Sysops. This is Gilgar's deck he made. He won a tournament with it a couple months ago. Actually, like 3-4 months ago. I'm actually not sure. But this is another fluid morphing deck. You've got Nunkwern, and you're using Naina to move your counters onto Avena or Navena. This deck does have like only 2 real fighters. You can fight with Nunkwern as well, but you don't really, or Avena, but you don't really want to. I do think it's a little worse than a couple other of the greedy decks, like Swimming Team or Sails. So I'm putting it lower on the list, but it does have its own merits where you can heal 25 with 1 counter off Avena, and you have the option of stacking counters on Navena to burn, and you have a very beefy fighter in Kepian because right at the beginning you have 90 energy on Kepian, 90 in all disciplines, and usually I think you give him a Torrent Crit, so he gets that extra boost of energy. But I don't think Sysops does that much in terms of damage usually, not that many damage modifiers. So it can get outpaced by those greedy decks that like to play slow, like Swimming Team, as an example, or Sails. And those pesky Omquad decks. And I'm going to put Stealthware, the last of our greedy decks, also in A tier. I do have to put it down here because Stelgar, you do put Chowler on him, but he starts with only 20 energy. And a lot of these decks can find a way to just destroy him right off the back, and then you've kind of lost your win con. You can still win, but very rarely will you. Like Underworld Burn, Danian Burn, these Omquad decks, Master the Sail Swimming Team, they can also unherd the Stealthware. Sysops can also unherd the Stealthware. So it's tough in that sense, but Stealthware is very good at stalling. Strike usually wins the combats pretty quickly, but if you get into a good pace, Strike gets a bit unlucky. You can outpace Strike, stall it, get a big enough stealth for it to beat Strike. You can beat Rahr. Rahr, they do have Zelf to jump your back line, but you do have Defender. Just hope they don't get Boreal Forest. And a couple other of these decks. Hiyadrum, you can use your Fell for the Deep to get the Hiyadrum supports out into the open, so you win that matchup. That's another good thing with Fell for. You can get the supports out of the open. So you might be able to do that against Sails if they don't burn you first. If they're running Surprising Rifts, they riff your Challer down, they might be able to just burn your Stelgar. But they might waste too much resources doing that. I haven't actually played that matchup. But I do know Stelfor does lose to Swimming Team. So I assume it's a similar matchup in Sails, but I can't say for sure. But again, Stelfor is good at punishing Wise Guys and Tree Frogs. You can bring their supports out into the open. You can also stall them to beef up your Stelgar. So yeah, it is a greedy deck, but it's still very strong, and I do think it deserves A tier. Now, there are no B tier decks here on my tier list, like B tier on the Chaotic Discord, but I am actually going to put both Compost and POP in the B tier in this order. Now, the reason I'm doing this is I think Compost has been kind of like on the decline, I would say. Not really on the decline, but there's been more decks that have risen and kind of taken its place in terms of how strong they are. Azil Compost is not a greedy deck. It's pretty strong. It's got a lot of damage modifiers, especially if you're running the Irabek version. You can have Earth 10 paired with Water 5. And Azil Compost is good if you're running double Ice Disc, and Dead Water is good too. Double Ice Disc can shut down Hiyadrum, but there are a lot of counters to Compost. I could say the same about Hermatrid, but Hermatrid can still survive if it's composted against, where Azil Compost, well, it can also still survive. But I do think Hermatrid is the better Compost deck, just because of that crazy amount of energy you can build up to with the Infects. Azil, and you do still have your Outperform 5 Inherit. Azil Compost running Irabek, you do have the Inherit Water 5, but with Lore's Chamber and Burn and any Earth deck being able to run Gravel Grind. And then Zerium actually stops you pretty hard because a lot of your attacks, you got those damage modifiers. But with Wise Guys with Zerium, Strike runs Zerium. A couple other decks can run Zerium, like Tree Frogs, Hermatrid's Attack. It just kind of shuts down your damage mods because you're not being greedy like a lot of these other decks, and I think there's room in the meta to be greedy, which is why a lot of these other decks I liked better than Compost. Now, I don't play Compost very much. I could be a little off base here, but I do think it's weaker than all the other A tiers and weak enough to drop to B tier. I don't think it beats any of the S tier decks. Pretty sure it loses to Danian Burn. It could beat Hiyadrum actually, but I think it loses to Sails, Wise Guys, maybe Tree Frogs. I think it beats Fleeander with the Ice Discs. But Hermatrid, I think, also loses to Sysops, maybe Stelfor too. I just think it has too many bad matchups. And that's why I got to drop it to B tier. Same thing I'm going to say about POP. I'm dropping in the B tier. It does beat Strike and Burn, but it's just kind of a worse Hiyadrum. Hiyadrum's all about making your whole deck around Hiyadrum and supporting him. Same thing goes for POP. You're making the whole deck around Maxor, Protective Param, and supporting him. And the deck likes to play slow. You've got Growlithe Forest, Hero City Tunnels, stuff like that, just to try and stall out matchups. But a lot of the times it backfires because you're stalling out so your Maxor can gain stacks of dealing extra damage to defeat the other creature that you're battling against. But if you stall out too much against a lot of these Fluid Morph decks, what they're stacking, these counters, they don't go away at the end of the turn like Maxor's attack counters, like attack stacks do. Those counters stay. And playing slow against Swimming Team, Master of the Sails, etc. is not something you want to be doing right now. which is why I don't think POP is very good. Also, it just loses to Unheard Melody again, although it does have a lot of negates, so that might not necessarily beat you. It does have more negates than Hiyadrum. I do think you usually run 3 in the deck, but it's also weak to Range Swift, and some strike decks run Range Swift. Rahr, I've seen Underworld Burn talking on with Steed. It's just, Estelle 4 runs Range Swift. It's a little tough for POP right now. I do think Azil Compost and POP are very high B tier, but I do think they are B tier. So feel free to let me know what you think about my tier list. Let me know in the comments. Tell me what you agree with, what you disagree with, etc. On the Chaotic Discord right now, there is a lot of us that are planning to test out these matchups so we can kind of refine the tier list and try and figure out the meta, what decks are strong against what, etc. So this is kind of like my hypothesis or speculation of how it's going to work out with how I think the decks are going to be ordered, but I haven't played a lot of these matchups. So testing it out with a lot of these experienced people from the Discord is going to be great, and I can see if my predictions are off or if they're right on the money, or if I'm just completely wrong about everything. Who knows what's going to happen. But that whole process is going to take a long time, so I wanted to make a video before that just to let you guys know what I think the meta is right now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.